Parshat Chaye Sarah, the life of Sarah, which sort of begins unceremoniously with her death, but we'll get there in just a moment. So I'm going to share that screen, and before we get started, let's all say our Torah blessing together. Baruch
Baruch
atah
atah
Adonai
Adonai
Eloheinu
Eloheinu
melech
melech
haolam
haolam
asher
asher
kishanu
tishanu
b'mitzvotav
b'mitzvotav
tivanu
v'tzivanu
ba'asot
ba'asot
divrei
divrei Torah.
Blessed are you, God, ruler of the universe, who has commanded us to busy ourselves with the study of Torah. So let's get busy with Torah. So, like I said, we're going to talk about blessings, but first let's situate ourselves. Let's see where we are now. We just, in our last week, had the dramatic events of the Akedah, where Abraham takes his son Isaac up to the mountain with the intent to sacrifice him, and he doesn't have to, which we appreciate very much as we are his descendants. And after that, we immediately go into this moment where, perhaps out of shock, and this may have been what you talked about last week in Torah study, Sarah dies. So despite the fact that the Parsha is called Chaye Sarah, it begins with her death and with Abraham purchasing a burial plot from his neighbors. And then he moves on and begins and continues to really build his family. He realizes it is time for his son Isaac to have a wife. And so he sends his servant, and I like to think best friend, Eliezer. It's just based on the way they talk to each other. He send him back to his homeland. So he's sending Eliezer back to where Abraham comes from, perhaps Chaldean Ur, to find a woman with very specific instruction. She needs to come from his family. She needs to be willing to come with him, because Abraham is very clear Isaac is not to go back to the land. God told Abraham, Lech Lecha, and that is exactly what he did. And he has no intention on going back on his leching, on his going. So underneath all of that action is something really unique happening, actually. And it's a little bit subtle, but once we start going into it, you'll notice it pops out everywhere. And that is that there is this whole really masterclass on blessings in the Torah and in the whole Tanakh. So before we get into that and look at this 15th century sage, Abarbanel, Abravanel, you could say it either way. I like Abravanel, rolls off the tongue better. We'll see what he said about it, but I'm curious first, just what comes to your mind when we say the word blessing? What do you imagine? What do you hear? Sure, Cindy.
I think of a good person who helps others and does good for the world.
Okay. Any other thoughts when we hear Benjamin? Go ahead.
Thank you, Jeff. For me, the blessings are all these wonderful richness of good things I have around me. The joy, I guess some material things, but the love of my partner, things like that.
Nice. Thank you. Jonathan, I see. Are you unmuted? Is that to talk, or maybe you're not unmuted? I don't know.
No. Well, I mean, I was actually just sort of going off a couple of things like Benjamin was, but I thought one other way to look at a blessing is that which is maybe done towards so if Benjamin says the blessing is the good thing I have around me, you could also consider like the blessing being that, I don't know, if a bottle of Coke is a good thing I have around me, that someone bringing me the bottle of Coke or whatever, the act of doing something positive toward me or beneficial toward me is also a blessing. I guess that's another way to look at it.
Yeah, thank you. It's excellent. Go ahead, Merle.
I think blessings also to be healthy enough to do the things you want to do for yourself and for others.
Nice. Thank you. When I first think of blessings, I think immediately actually of just like, what do I do before I eat, like challah on Shabbat, right? Like you say a blessing, you do that. And so I wondered if perhaps we would go there. But in either case, We've done what we need to do educationally. We've noted there is a certain connotation with blessings. For me, maybe it's something active, and that probably speaks to what I do and engage in my life. And for many of you, it refers to the things that you're appreciating around you. And both of those approaches are correct and are a little bit different than how they appear in the Tanakh, and a little bit different than how Abravanel will explain them. And so we're going to look to our 15th century sage through the lens of a 21st century sage, a Rabbanit, Yael Keller. If I realize maybe Rabbanit is a new term or different. Rabbanit is it's essentially a rabbi, but it is an Orthodox female ordained clergy, specifically from Yeshiva Maharat. And they have some amazing scholarship coming out of their organization. And so I was excited to be able to uplift that. So let's see what Rabbanit Yael Keller says about Abarbanel. Do I have a volunteer who'd be willing to read this first paragraph here?
I'm happy to read, Jeff. Do you mind making it just a touch bigger, please?
I would be happy to. That's a good idea.
And this is where it starts, where it says the Arbanel.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Tim.
The Abarbanel delineates three different types of brachot. The first is where God gives a blessing directly to people. For example, God blesses Avraham, Bereshit 24, verse 1. Quote, and God blessed Avraham with everything. The second type of bracha is where we, as people, offer God praise and thanks in the form of blessings as described in Divrei Hayamim 1, chapter 29, verse 10, quote, and David blessed the Lord. The last type of blessing is when people give blessings to each other, offering the hope that God will ultimately bless that person. For example, in Bereshit chapter 28, verse 1, Yitzchak gives a blessing to his son, Yaakov, quote, so Isaac sent for Jacob and blessed him. We have the power to wish and hope that good things happen, and we can articulate those hopes however we want, but we don't have the power to grant them as God does.
All right. That's going to be, that last line is going to be an important note for later. But thank you, Tim. So there are these three forms of blessing. There's the ones where God blesses people. There's the ones where people bless God. And there's the people to people approach as well. That's our third type. And each one of those sort of uniquely exists along this Parsha. And there are even other moments where we might wonder if there's a blessing. And we're actually going to come to one of those right away as we encounter Eliezer, the servant, meeting Rebecca for the first time. We'll break this up. This is like a longer section of Tanakh, but we got to have the beginning and the end. So I'm wondering, is there anyone willing to read this first paragraph, and then we'll switch for the second? All right, Meryl, I knew I could count on you. Susan, maybe you'll take the next one.
He made the camels kneel down by the well outside the city at evening time, the time when women came out to draw water. And he said, O Adonai, God of my master, Abraham's house, grant me food, grant me good fortune this day, and deal graciously with my master Abraham. Here I stand by the spring as the daughters of the townspeople out to draw water. Let the maiden to whom I say, please lower your jar that I may drink, and who replies, drink, and I will also water your camels. Let her be the one whom you have declared for your servant Isaac. Therefore, thereby shall I know that you have dealt graciously with my master.
Nice. Thank you. So, and as we were reading that, I actually just picked up another. This is not even the subtle blessing I was going to talk about in this section, but there is this moment where, you know, in the way that we discussed that a blessing might be, right, Jonathan, if somebody brings you a Coke, they've like blessed you with that, right? Actually, in this moment, Eliezer is saying to God, I need someone who is a blesser. I need someone who's going to come out and see me and be willing to bless right away. And that is, I didn't think about that before. So that's one of those subtle moments. So it's all over the place. He's looking for a third type, a people-to-people blessing, and knows that that's going to be the right kind of woman. Let's move forward to this next section. Susan, are you down? Are you up for it?
He had scarcely finished speaking when Rebekah, who was born to Bethuel, the son of Milcah, the wife of Abraham's brother Nahor. So she is a cousin then, came out with her jar on her shoulder. The maiden was very beautiful and a virgin, no man having known her. She went down to the spring, filled her jar, and came up. I never saw that before, but there's something sexual in that. The servant ran toward her and said, "Let me sip a little water from your jar." "Drink, my lord," she said, and she quickly lowered her jar upon her hand and let him drink. When she had let him drink his fill, she said, "I will also draw for your camels until they finish drinking." Quickly emptying her jar into the trough, she ran back to the well to draw, and she drew for all his camels. The man, meanwhile, stood gazing at her, whether Adonai had made his errand successful or not. When the camels had finished drinking, the man took a gold nose ring weighing a half shekel and 2 gold bands for her arms, 10 shekels in weight. "Pray tell me," he said, "whose daughter are you? Is there room in your father's house for us to spend the night?" And she replied, "I am the daughter of Bethuel, the son of Milcah, whom she bore to Nahor." And she went on, "There's plenty of straw and feed at home, and also room to spend the night."
All right. Thank you. So this next section, we see Eliezer has made a petition to God, and it immediately comes true, which is pretty exciting. It doesn't, at least in my experience, isn't usually that fast. So we're impressed here. And then we see, of course, she does what he was looking for. She gives this blessing. And I think it is important, although it isn't the point of this lesson today, to really think about what the weight of that blessing of Rebecca to Eliezer is. Drawing water for a person, fine. You're probably not going to drink much more than this, right, at any given time. This is about a liter. But camels are the thirstiest, at least by reputation, animals that we're aware of. And so for her to draw until they finish drinking is her to, in some ways, extend a limitless blessing. There is a limit, of course, but in this time, especially when water is, we're getting it from the ground. It's hard fought every time you're going to take a drink. This is significant. This is like a very powerful moment, and is one of the things that we focus on a lot when we think about this story. But now we get to the meat. I'll read this one because it's just 2 verses. "The man bowed low in homage to God and said, 'Blessed be Hashem, the God of my master Abraham's house, who has not withheld steadfast faithfulness from my master, for I have been guided on my errand by Hashem to the house of my master's kin.'" So here's the question. If you don't remember, it's okay. I'm going to scroll and we'll see. Does anyone know which type of blessing did we just experience? The first type, where God blesses people, the second type, where people bless God, or the third type, where people bless people? Got to vote for 2?
God.
Yes, exactly. This is the second type, where people bless God, right? So our question to think about, and I'd be curious to know how it lands, is what is the difference between that first part where Eliezer speaks to God this is the verses 12 to 14, where he says, "God, send me this person, and here's how I want to know that she's the right woman," and the second part where he bows low and acknowledges what had happened. What's the difference? It may be, if you think it's obvious, it kind of is. Benjamin?
I mean, the second one is you're sort of relishing what has happened as the blessing. The experience is the blessing. The first one is more, let the Rams win the Super Bowl. You're asking for something.
Yeah.
What a blessing that would be. Yes, that's the difference. And the question is, and how you know, of course, is the context, right? But I'm curious, if we think about blessings as something that we're doing actively, right? We're trying to bring about. then which is actually the part that's effective in this scenario? There's the request that Eliezer makes, which is technically not a blessing. And then there's the blessing that he makes, which is in response to the fulfillment of the request. Which to me, we don't have to answer this, it can be rhetorical, to me shows that there's actually something different than what maybe we understand about blessings and what they do and how God makes them work and how people make them work. Because here, the part that God responds to is not the blessing. It's the bakasha, it's the request. And then the blessing comes afterward to say thank you. So there's no, major point here to make other than to just we're starting to reimagine what a blessing is, what it means to be a blesser, what it means to be a blessee, if you will, a recipient of blessing, but also are blessings the active, effective thing that we do? Or are they more representational? So we'll hold on to that. It'll get better. But, right, so we think of them as making things happen, but at least in this form, it's about appreciating the things that happened. And though, it looks like the camels are involved. So this is what Radak, he's a 12th century commentator, says about that verse where the camels kneel and he makes the blessing. Vayivarech vayivrach hagmalim. He made them go down on their knees in order that the jugs of water could be presented for them to drink, right? This is very logical, right? Like if a camel has saddlebags, needs to go down. And while all this is happening, he prayed to God for the right kind of woman to put in an appearance, right? And to come out. And so that's a weird translation. I did not make it, and that's on me. But what this indicates to me, right, is that the camel's kneeling is part of the blessing. And we know this, and we're going to get to this at the very end, but the word barach, or yivrach, all comes from the same root, which in some senses means to bend the knee. So might we understand that actually Abraham or Eliezer's request in the beginning was a blessing and was an active thing that made her come out, that made God respond? Because we have this form. Why do we need to use those? There are all kinds of words for bowing or for getting down. Why specifically do we need the camels to bend their knees with the same verbal root as blessing? Was this, in fact, outside of Abravanel, in his theory, was that first request actually truly a blessing? Listen, Brad, I see your hand.
Well, I'm on a totally different track here.
Let's go.
Excuse me, but I'm confused at the genealogy. Can you scroll up? Because is this brother of Abraham,
Yes,
Nahor, is this the father of Lot?
Oh, excellent question. I think.
And
yeah.
are we dealing here then with Lot's descendant? I'm confused here at the and are we somehow is there some echo of the Lot story in this story?
That's a really excellent question and a good observation. And I can't say for sure that there's an echo, but I can say Lot is Abraham's nephew. So this is actually something that I guess I could look into and should. Is Nahor actually Lot's father?
No.
Or is there another brother, right?
No, it's Haran.
Right,
And
Haran.
Dies in Haran, and I was confused. Haran's the name of the brother as well as a city, but it's Haran.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. So this is not Lot's father, but it is Lot's uncle, right? This is one of Abraham's brothers. So this is this is a cousin marriage, which we know was very common back in those days, and also maybe up until like 100 years ago. And so this is part of that very specific instruction that Abraham gives to Eliezer. He says, I need you to go back to my homeland, and I need you to find somebody who's from my ilk, who's from my kin. And because that's also the way that we're going to know. So it's possible, right, that Abraham knew that this camel thing would happen, maybe. And perhaps this was part of the plan all along, right? Because if this is where he comes from, then maybe he knows this is how we raise people over here. If you're in Chaldean Ur, if you're back with my family, we water the camels. And if somebody comes out and she's not going to do that, then clearly something has gone wrong, and we don't want to continue with the situation. And God forbid that my son should go back there. So
I think she's also younger because Isaac's was a cousin to Bethuel. Bethuel was the son of Nahor and Milcah. So
right.
So but they're still cousins. I don't know whether it's second or once removed. I never.
That's yeah, I guess that actually would be, if she's born to Isaac's first cousin, then it's second cousin. Okay, a little more distance. Feel comfortable with that. Brad, is your hand still raised?
No, sorry
Okay,
about
no
that.
worries. It's fine to leave it up there. All right. Any other thoughts on this section before we move forward to find our next blessing? Okay. So let's look at the next one. Do I have a volunteer to read this very brief moment that takes place just before Rebecca leaves with Eliezer? Feel free to unmute and read if that's your jam. Go ahead, Ellen.
But I don't see what to read.
Ooh, that's on me. Okay. Do you see this where it says Genesis 24:60?
No.
Oh, so you're not seeing my screen that I'm sharing.
No.
Is everyone else seeing the screen that I'm sharing?
Yes.
All right. I'm not sure.
Good for them.
I'm not sure what to do about that, to be honest with you.
Let them do it.
I can read it.
Okay. I'll read it. It's brief. And they is her brothers, they blessed Rebekah and said to her, "O sister, may you grow into thousands of myriads. May your descendants seize the gates of their foes." This is a good blessing, right? This is like, we don't want anyone to have foes ideally, but if you know that it's a precondition for your situation, then you would like to seize their gates. So this is good. And it is, of course, the third type of blessing, right? So we've had the second type, and now we're in the third type where people bless other people. And I'm curious, this blessing, based on what you know about the Torah, what we've studied this cycle since we wrapped it back to the beginning, or even that is coming ahead, does this blessing sound familiar to you? I'm seeing faces that are like, yeah, I think so, but there's something off, right?
Yeah. So we have some of this where God blessed Abraham and then Isaac and the others. May you grow into thousands of myriads. So blessing was for like the stars in the sky and the sands of the earth. And then that seems to be, that's a recurrent kind of thing. But the other ones, I don't believe that was in the original one. May your descendants seize the gates of their foes. It comes later in bits, but not the blessing for Abraham. I mean,
no, I think
it's blessing to other people. The people are blessing people. But if you ask if there were resonances from before, that's what a little bit I see.
So you're exactly on it, right? That there is there are these moments for this part about the descendants seizing the gates of their foes. That's a new thing. And also, this is people to people. Whereas in the previous and future moments of this, it's God blessing our patriarchs and matriarchs for their expansion. So on the one hand, before we move into the next question, for me, I think that we might understand that the reason that the brothers are thinking about descendants seizing the gates of their foes is that, and the reason that God maybe doesn't reference that is because seizing things, war, these are human concerns. These are things that we obsess over way too much. And that if God is going to give us a blessing for success, granted, we have moments where God, lets us know that we're going to have 400 difficult years and that we're, perhaps going to be a people alone. These things are not always so positive, but God doesn't typically directly bless us with that type of violent imagery sort of thing. So there's that piece of it. But again, knowing what we know about the way the story progresses and the way that this blessing may recur again in some ways, did it work? What do we think? Is this a blessing that did the brothers achieve their goal here? And if so, how do you see this blessing fulfilled in our world or in the Torah? I'm probably talking more about the Torah, but we can also talk about our world.
So what are you asking? Has this actually happened? Am I right now that the descendants are seizing the gates of their foes, the Hamas? And if you deal with that earlier, Shem, when Levi and Simeon, is it Simeon or Simon, or both?
I think Simeon, I think, is what we're thinking of.
Destroyed the men, at least their sexual prowess in Shechem, and there have been perpetual wars in Israel. So that's a lot to think about.
So that is certainly one way to take it. I'm thinking specifically right now about the descendants piece, which is I could have been more clear about. But also, I think you're right that these words about seizing the gates of our foes really do, I think, hit us differently in this time than they might have, maybe not a year ago, but 2 years ago. But thinking about the descendants and whether or not it works, right? We see the people by the time between now and when they exit in the Exodus from Egypt, they've gone from a family of dad Abraham and son Isaac and now wife Rebecca. That's 3 to 600,000, we're told, that left. So in my mind, yeah, go ahead, Brad.
Well, I'm struck by the fact that it says, it doesn't say descendants defending their own gates. It talks about descendants seizing the gates of their foes, which sounds like more of an aggressive rather than defensive posture. So, of course, that makes me think of when they enter Canaan and decimate an entire population.
So perhaps really the whole thing did come true. And so to my mind, I think that at least the first one, although now I think, Brad, you've actually convinced me that they both are in play, but at least the first one does come true. And so then we're left with this question is, if God blessed the people with this and these guys blessed Rebecca with this, who did it? Who blessed, right? How did this happen for our people? Jonathan.
Well, I don't know how much technically a revava is, but and myriad is a kind of a literary open-ended term, so I don't know what they're getting at with the translation. But originally, technically, the term myriad means 10,000. And so if you have her, Rebecca's descendants being at thousands of 10,000s, so that means 10 million or 20 million. So if you look at the population of Israel, it's about 9 million or so. And then if you look, what are there, like 15 million Jews, maybe, 20 million. So, I mean, she has, she has tens of millions of descendants. So that part has come true at the very least right there. In terms of, I guess what's going to happen between Israel and her foes is going to, I guess, come out at the end of history, right? But we're doing pretty good so far.
Yeah. So a note on rivava, I don't know that it's that it actually is a technical term for an amount, but it comes from this. It shares linguistics with squaring things. So I think of it as exponential growth, sort of, which may amount to 10,000 or 15 million. And I suppose, depending on what the starting number was on the exponent you apply to it, then certainly that is the case. So this question, though, about efficacy, which is one that may not be present for you, but and maybe I manufactured it, but is one that the ancient and medieval rabbis were actually very concerned about this blessing in particular. They saw this, they saw the brothers, and they knew that we would be learned Jews and we would know what happens in the rest of the Torah, and that we would be concerned because in our next story, when we get Jacob and he goes and is with Laban, who is Rebekah's brother, right? We learn that they are idolaters. They are not people who believe in and worship the one God like we do. So here is some Bereshit Rabbah, a little bit of Midrash that is going to give us some context there. So I'll read this bold part at the top, which is going to be our verse, just to bring us into it. And then I'd love to have someone read through the rest of, let's say, up until this parenthesis where it says Genesis 25:21. I got to volunteer before I start, and we can just go seamless.
I'm happy to read the next part.
Wonderful. I was going to call on you anyway. Tim is my classmate, so it's nice to get to have him here with us. Okay. They sent Rebekah, their sister, and her nursemaid, and Abraham's servant, and his men. They blessed Rebekah and said to her, "Our sister, may you become thousands and myriads, and let your descendants inherit the gates of their enemies."
They sent Rebekah, they blessed Rebekah. They were downcast and despondent that she was going, and they blessed her only with their mouths. "Our sister, may you become thousands and myriads." Rabbi Baruchah and Rabbi Levi, in the name of Rabbi Chama bar Hanina, why was Rebekah granted conception only after Isaac prayed for her? It was so that the idolaters, Laban and his mother, should not say, "Our prayer bore fruit." Instead, Isaac entreated the Lord on behalf of his wife. Rabbi Baruchah said in the name of Rabbi Levi, "The blessing of the lost would come to me." The blessing of the lost, Oved, this refers to Laban, the Aramean, as it is stated, "An Aramean sought to destroy Oved, my father." Quote, "would come upon me." This refers to Rebekah. "Our sister, may you become thousands, Alfei, and myriads, Revavah, chieftains, Alufim, emerged from her through Esau, and myriads through Jacob. Chieftains from Esau, the chieftain of Teman, chieftain of Kenaz, myriads, Revavah, from Jacob, as it is written, "I rendered you numerous, Revavah, like the plants of the field." Some say that both of these emerged through Israel, as it is written, "When it rested, he said, 'Repose, Lord, among the myriad, revote thousands of Alfei, Israel.'"
Thank you. So the first part of this answers that question, where first we're like, well, wait a minute. Who actually was successful in blessing the people of Israel, because the brothers kind of sneak in between God blessing Abraham and God blessing Jacob and say, oh, by the way, Rebecca, you're going to have myriads. And they want us to know that actually that's not the effective blessing. They're idolaters. God isn't really interested in what they have to say so much. Rather, in the next Parsha, when Rebecca is barren, Isaac prays to God and intercedes on her behalf, and then she becomes pregnant. And so they want us to know that it was, in fact, God who does this blessing, and that it was really, they blessed with their mouths only, which is to say they said something and it had no spiritual significance or effect. The second part actually meant to leave out, so we'll skip it. But then when we get to this next part, our sister, you have become, may you become thousands and myriads, and they break up the Hebrew words to let us know which is going to refer to which, and they try to break that down for us, and who was the thousands and who was the myriads, and eventually they let us know that it was all from Jacob. But here, to me, this is a little bit confusing, because they don't reject the idolater's role in that one, right? When we talk about Rebecca having descendants in the first place, they say, well, that she only was able to conceive because Isaac prayed, not because of the idolaters. But then they directly bring back in the idolaters, right? With our sisters, right? Right here, our sister, may you become, I'm so sorry, things are moving around. It moved around too much. They say that our sister, right? And it directly references the brothers, and then they tell us that it was fulfilled without letting us know another way that God actually was a part of it. So this makes us, or at least it makes me ask this question: can people do blessings, or is it all actually God? And if we remember what Rabbinic Yael Keller said at the beginning, is that it is all about God's will. When we say a blessing, or when we bless other people, we're asking God to intercede, but ultimately that is where the power lies. I'm not 100% sure I agree with that, but that is the logic that is presented here through these two exchanges. Yeah, Merle.
So when we bless our children, like at Shabbat services, are we asking God to intercede, or are we doing the blessing ourselves?
So that's the grand question.
That just hit me. I mean, when
so it seems like, right, based on our contemporary source and our medieval source, and even our ancient source, the rabbis of the Midrash, they are pretty sure that actually, when you're blessing people, you're noting to God that you want this to happen, not that what you're doing is effective. But I don't know that I agree with that. I think that if we talk about somebody bringing you a Coca-Cola, right, to bring it back to that, which seems so mundane, but if you're really thirsty and your blood sugar's low, is like a life-giving act. I don't know that we need God to be involved in that. And that feels like a great blessing. And it gets even bigger and bigger than that. And of course, when we think about all the blessings around us, right, some of them we may feel that God was a part of, and other of them we might feel like I worked hard for that blessing, or I'm lucky in this way or another. So,
or how do we tell our children I'm saying it for God when they're probably way too young to understand that?
Right. Or what if you don't believe in God, or if your kids don't believe in God? There's a question there of how do we still feel good about blessings, and how do we make them happen? So hold that thought, because that will come back at the very end. But quickly, we have to get to our last type of blessing, which is actually Abravanel's first type of blessing. After Isaac and Rebecca have met and are moved into their tent together, Abraham dies. He's a very old guy at this point. He was already in his 90s when Isaac was born, and Isaac is now in his 40s. So this is a we would say skenim, right? Like a really stately old person. And so he passes. And after that, we read that God blessed his son Isaac. And then Isaac settles near a well where of what God's life. Ber Lachai Roi is like the well of the witness of life, you could say. So this is Abravanel's first type of blessing, right? Which is maybe our most common that we encounter, where God blesses people in the Tanakh. But it's also the most vague, right? Earlier, we have blessings where Eliezer blesses God, and we know exactly what the blessing is about, whether it's the blessing with the camels helping out to make it a blessing or the blessing of thanks. Either way, we have a blesser and we have a blessee. We have a subject, we know about it. But here, and even in the other one, but here we have God blessed Isaac. Full stop. So what is this blessing and why is this blessing? Right? So we go back to our midrash. We find, and this is where I accidentally moved sources around. So we go back to not into our midrash this time, we're going to go into our commentators. And we'll start with our most famous medieval commentary. And he lets us know, right, Rashi, that God comforted Isaac with the words of the formula of consolation, which you can find in the Talmud, Sota 14a, but also that the Holy One, blessed be God, entrusted the blessings to Abraham to bless whoever, meaning that as we're talking about who has the power to bless, God gave Abraham the power to bless without God necessarily being involved. So we should think about that, right? But Abraham was afraid, it seems, to bless Isaac. According to Rashi, Abraham knew that Esau would be born and that also Jacob would be born and needed to be the one who was numerous, Jacob, who would become Israel. And so he actually did not ever bless his own son. And so God has filled in to do that. So he says, therefore, let the master of blessings come himself and bless whomever it seems proper in his eyes. And then in response to that, God says, that's Isaac. Radak, another one of our medievals, also known as Kimchi, but it's spelled like kimchi. And I like that because the Glazer campus is in Koreatown. He explains not so much why the blessing, but what is the blessing. He says he made Yitzchak successful in his undertakings as his father Abraham. He, of course, being God, which, obviously God is not a he or a she or any of those things. God blesses Yitzchak and makes Yitzchak as successful as Abraham. That's a very standard blessing. And then we get to Chizkuni, who he's a little bit later, he's still a medieval, and he tries to sort of bring all of these ideas together about what is it that God was blessing Isaac with and why. And so Rashi explained that although God had bestowed the power to bestow blessings on Abraham, in fact, God had given Abraham free hand on whom to bestow blessings, and he did not make use of that power to bless Isaac. So Rabbi Nehemiah claims that although Abraham had passed on the power to distribute blessings to Yitzchak, so we have to break that down for a moment. God tells Abraham, you can bless people. You have my power to bless. Abraham does not bless Isaac, but does give Isaac the power as well. So Isaac now can bless. But Abraham had not conferred a blessing on son, and God had to make up for that omission. And according to some sources, right, this is what we just saw in Rashi, that it was because Abraham was afraid of that the blessing may actually end up applying to Esau's descendants, which we don't want if we are the children of Israel. And the reason that I bring all of this up, right, this blessing of the first type, what is the blessing, why is the blessing, is because it breaks down what we thought we knew 5 minutes ago. When we thought that Rabbanit Yael told us that, and also that Abravanel told us, and also that our rabbis told us that only God can bless, we now have this understanding that actually God can give the power to bless to people. And so now we have to wonder, at least I think we must wonder, if we are those descendants, those inheritors of the tradition of Abraham and Isaac, then do we need God to bless? Are we the inheritors of the power to make blessings? And I'm curious if anyone has any reactions to that. Merle, that's how I feel. Yeah, Susan.
This is not confusing to me. And I think it's a slippery thing with blessings, but you brought that up in the beginning. There were 3 different types. In terms of, there's also the saying, may you be a blessing. Do we cover that? And that's what also Abraham was. I was wondering, what does it mean, may you be a blessing? Well, a blessing would be one, a model of virtue for other people. A blessing is our nurses and doctors who heal, that's a blessing to people. The power to bless, I can't think that I have the efficacy, but I wasn't in the line that, and a woman doesn't get that, a power of having that blessing being powerful. And like Merle's question, when you confer blessings to your children on Shabbat, may you be like Ephraim and Manasseh, that you don't fight with your siblings. And that would be a blessing. But I don't see myself as having any power for my blessing to be fulfilled. I think it comes from God. And you can thank God and request things from God, but I don't think I have the power. It would only perhaps, and when rabbis are ordained, the rabbi, what is it? You do a blessing for the newbies, the new rabbis that are coming on, but it's may you be, I think, a blessing to other people, and may you be blessed in that regard. So I know I don't have the power. So I'm not God, unfortunately, but nonetheless.
All right. Thank you. Okay, we're gonna hold on to those thoughts. I think you have more power than you realize, but that's just me. But Brad, I see your hand, and then we'll go to Merle.
Well, I'm still struggling with your very first question about what's a blessing. And, I went back and I looked at the derivation, the etymology of the English word blessing, which means to consecrate with blood, that there is a blood element, at least if we go back to the old English and the origin of the word bless. So I'm wondering, from a philological point of view, do we know what the etymology of the Hebrew word blessing is? And so that we can, get a better understanding of what we're talking about when we use the word blessing, which
Brad,
seems very, very amorphous.
I'm so glad you asked, because the next source is a dictionary entry. But before that, I want to go to Merle and hear her response, and then I'll break it, unless it would be helpful, Merle, for your answer to see what I brought.
Well, so Susan just mentioned like doctors and nurses. I had my once every 3-month doctor appointment yesterday, and it's all about my diabetes. So when the doctor told me I'm okay and I'm managing things right and my numbers are right for my one kidney and the diabetes and everything else, was he giving me a blessing that I can go and I'm okay for the next 3 months and not worry about it? Or is he just telling me, okay, according to your numbers this week, you're fine? Is that considered a blessing? Where do we go with that when we leave the doctor's office? The fact that I had to fast, and fasting makes me sick, and I ate everything in sight yesterday afternoon and last night. I mean, was that part of a blessing? I guess it goes to Brad's question, is what is a blessing?
Yeah. Okay. This is great food for thought. I would say, before we move to the definition, that we do know that the way that God creates things and blesses is through words. So perhaps when someone does tell us good news, it can be sort of a blessing, and there is generative power in the words that we use, but which is a great segue into a dictionary. So this is the Jastrow dictionary. It looks very cluttered, so I will read the parts that we need from it. I will, let you know a little something about myself. This is like my favorite book, which sounds crazy, but it is I'll be right back. I have this very old style version of it. It's got the marbled pages. It's excellent. And this is the dictionary for the Talmud. It has words in Hebrew and Aramaic, though it calls it Chaldean. And it really is this wealth of information. And I love it because it allows us to think beyond just the pshat, the simple answer, and to really think through the whole lexical range of the words that we encounter in our text, the whole array of meanings. So the word blessing, bracha, or to bless, comes from the Hebrew root barach, bet, resh, or chaf. And it comes from, if you see here, these two letters, the primitive root, bet, resh, bear. We'll come back to that. The range of meanings for words that involve bet, resh, chaf are to cave out, to select, or to point out, so to note specifically. And they give us examples of when we have it in the Baruch, which is a sort of a passive form. We have chosen, or blessed, or praised. So first we have some active stuff, right? We have the physical act of hollowing something out, or the physical act of selecting. When we move into the PL, which is one of the more causative forms, we have to praise, or to bless, or even to recite a benediction. So when we say, hamotzi lechem min haaretz, that is a bracha. That's something that we are saying that blessing. It also, sort of surprisingly, can carry the meaning of blasphemy. It can be to blaspheme. It can also indicate that something is praiseworthy. And it can even relate to cutting something, but not cutting it like in half or cutting it for the purpose of whatever, but cutting through, making our way through something. Like imagine hacking through, vines in a jungle. It also, like we talked about with the camels, has the same root as the word knee, like our knees and the way that they bend. And in the he feel, we can use it to form a knee, or to bend a vine, or even, I think if you think about the way that old metal, if they heat it up and bent it and it makes sort of a knee, like that is lahavriach, hivrich. And it can also be sort of to make something, and that bending can have to do with growing as well. So it's not just about bending a plant's vine to make a shape, but about making it to grow in a certain way independently. So from that, we can make a lot of metaphors, right? And before I get to my sort of final drash on all of this, on what I think we're supposed to take from it, I am curious that of those definitions, do they make you think about anything different about blessings? Anything different from, and maybe Brad, I wonder if this has been helpful for you in thinking about what is a blessing really?
Well, I'm just struck by none of these seem to have anything to do with blood, which is very tied up with the English word blessing.
Yeah.
So the philology of words is it's fascinating.
Susan. Oh, you're still muted.
Yeah, sorry.
There you go.
Can we go back up a bit too? I think a lot of those talk about what is a blessing, except for blasphemy. I don't get that. I mean, one of them to point out, to select, you're blessing some people or a blessing. They're chosen, they're blessed, those are synonyms. But also increasing, you had some other positive things that were positive that would come with the blessing. But I don't get blaspheme. That's the opposite. But then they say praiseworthy to come through the Virgin. Some of these, I think blasphemy is the antithesis. So, but others could be ways that things could be blessed.
It is possible that where the example it gives us relating to blasphemy comes from the Talmud, and it may be that it's being used sort of linguistically to be like ironic. That does happen sometimes.
That I could see.
So thank you, everybody, for being a part of this sort of confusing conversation today. Not as streamlined as we may typically be, but I promised that I had a point, and here it is. If we go to the most primitive root of blessing, of barach, you get bet resh, bar, and we find something really special. Bar relates to the Hebrew word bur, which is a pit, an empty expanse, and it even connects us to the Aramaic word burchata, which is something hollow, anything that's hollow. This to me implies that blessings carry with them a notion of space and of place. And so, what I want us to take is that blessings can open us up. They can hollow us out. They can hollow bad things out of us. They can make space for good things. And if we think back to our Parsha, right, this blessing of people to people is like maybe even hollowing out Rebecca's ancestry and making space for this new thing. We might think about opening up her womb when Isaac does it, that we're making space there, right? And we must, though, not just be willing to receive, but make space for ourselves to bestow blessings. Because I think that if we take our Jewish philosophers, some of whom believe that God is still in our world, but a little bit farther away, and that more of the power is in our hands, I think that we actually are the ones now who bestow blessings, still in partnership with God. We still want God to intercede, but we are the blessers now. And we need to see them around us, and we need to make them for ourselves and for other people. And so, as you go into this week of Thanksgiving, and I know that we all count our blessings, I really hope that we can think about the space that we make for these blessings in our lives, the space that we want to give to others in welcoming them into our homes or in going into theirs, but about how space itself is a blessing and how blessings can open up so much in our world. So Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you.
Happy
Shabbat
Thanksgiving.
Shalom. Thank you. Happy
And
Thanksgiving.
this has been a blessing to me, really. I feel that I've opened up new ways of thinking about this Parsha and this topic. And I want to thank you all for participating and being here and going along on this sort of rocky journey with me, but we made it.
Shabbat
Thanks
shalom.
so much.
All right, thanks.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
How do I get out? Oh, I'm sharing my screen still.